Good evening, friends. And tonight we're going to discover the fascinating history of coffee. Have you ever wondered why millions of people begin every morning by reaching for a cup of coffee without even thinking about it? It has become such an ordinary part of life that we rarely stop to ask a fascinating question. Who was the very first person brave enough to taste those strange little red berries growing on an unfamiliar mountain shrub? Even more curious, how did those berries eventually conquer kingdoms, inspire scholars, survive religious bans, spark political debates, fuel revolutions, and become one of the world's most traded products? Tonight, we're traveling back more than 1,000 years, long before cafés filled city streets, before espresso machines hissed in busy kitchens, and before coffee became the comforting drink sitting beside your bed or work desk. Our journey begins in a rugged landscape filled with green mountains, cool air, rushing streams, and endless forests. A place where no one could possibly imagine they were standing beside the birthplace of a global obsession. Welcome to the ancient highlands of Ethiopia. As always, settle into a comfortable position, relax your shoulders, let the day's worries slowly drift away, and together, let's discover the remarkable history of coffee. Around the 9th century, according to one of history's most famous legends, a young goat herder named Kaldi spent his days leading his animals across the green hills of Ethiopia. His routine was simple. Every morning, he guided his goats towards fresh grass. Every evening, he returned them safely home. Nothing seemed unusual, until one extraordinary afternoon. As the sun began lowering towards the mountains, Kaldi noticed something strange. Instead of becoming tired after spending the entire day climbing rocky slopes, his goats were behaving quite differently. They were running, jumping, climbing impossible rocks, almost dancing with endless energy. At first, Kaldi worried. Perhaps they had eaten a poisonous plant. Perhaps something had frightened them. But the goats looked perfectly healthy. In fact, they seemed happier than ever. Curious, Kaldi carefully watched where they wandered. Soon he found them gathered around a shrub covered with glossy green leaves and bright red berries. Again and again the goats eagerly ate the fruit. Within minutes they became unusually energetic. Unable to resist his curiosity, Kaldi picked a few berries himself. Some versions of the story claim he tasted them immediately. Others suggest he carried them to a nearby monastery. No one truly knows, because despite how famous this legend has become, historians cannot confirm whether Kaldi ever existed at all. In fact, there are no written records describing the story until several hundred years after coffee had already become popular. Yet legends often survive because they contain a deeper truth. Whether Kaldi was real or imagined, coffee almost certainly did originate somewhere within the forests of Ethiopia. And that part is supported by science. Wild coffee plants still grow naturally throughout Ethiopia today. The species known as Coffea arabica first evolved there thousands of years ago. Long before humans cultivated it, birds carried its seeds through forests, while animals occasionally fed upon its fruit. Nature quietly protected coffee for countless generations before people recognized its remarkable potential. But early humans didn't drink coffee the way we do today. There were no mugs, no roasting, no grinding, no steaming cups releasing rich aromas into the morning air. Instead, people valued the fruit itself. The outer layer of the berry tasted pleasantly sweet. Inside lay two pale seeds, the very beans we know today. Some communities simply chewed the berries during long journeys. Others crushed the beans with animal fat, creating compact energy balls carried by hunters and travelers. These early foods provided lasting energy without anyone understanding exactly why. They simply noticed that people felt more alert after eating them. Centuries passed. Coffee remained largely unknown beyond Ethiopia. The forests kept their secret.
Generations came and went. Kingdoms rose. Kingdoms disappeared. Yet the small evergreen shrub continued growing quietly beneath the Ethiopian sun. Eventually, merchants traveling across the Red Sea began carrying unusual goods between Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. Gold, salt, ivory, spices, textiles, and among these valuable cargoes, coffee slowly made its first journey beyond its birthplace. At first, almost no one paid attention. The berries looked ordinary. There was little reason to believe they would one day reshape economies across entire continents. But history often begins exactly this way. Not with grand announcements, not with kings issuing proclamations, but with small discoveries whose importance becomes clear only centuries later. Imagine standing beside those ancient traders as they loaded wooden boats along the African coast. They couldn't possibly know they were transporting one of history's most influential plants. The crossing itself wasn't easy. Strong winds swept across the Red Sea. Small vessels rocked endlessly over restless waves. Yet these trade routes connected two worlds, Africa and Arabia. It was there, across the sea, that coffee's destiny truly began to change. Because while Ethiopia gave coffee its birthplace, another land would transform it into the drink that billions recognize today. And that's exactly where our journey continues next.
For countless generations, coffee remained a quiet treasure of the Ethiopian highlands. Travelers carried stories about an unusual berry that seemed to restore energy and sharpen the mind. But few people outside East Africa understood its true value. Across the narrow waters of the Red Sea lay the mountains of Yemen. Unlike the lush forests of Ethiopia, Yemen was a land of dramatic cliffs, dry valleys, and ancient caravan routes connecting Arabia with Africa, Persia, and beyond. Merchants crossed these routes every day, bringing spices, silk, precious stones, incense, and countless other goods. Among those ordinary trading items were sacks of unfamiliar coffee cherries. At first, coffee attracted little attention. It looked no different from many other fruits sold in local markets. No one imagined that this simple berry would one day become one of history's most beloved drinks. Over time, however, something began to change. Religious scholars, travelers, and Sufi mystics started experimenting with the berries. The Sufis were devoted to long nights of prayer and meditation. Their spiritual gatherings often lasted until dawn. Remaining awake through the night was never easy. Many searched for natural ways to stay alert while keeping their minds calm and focused. Some began boiling the fruit, others crushed the seeds. Different communities tried different methods. Eventually, someone made a discovery that changed history forever. Instead of eating the berries, what if the seeds themselves were dried, then heated over a fire, ground into small pieces, and finally mixed with hot water? The result was unlike anything people had tasted before. The liquid was dark, its aroma filled entire rooms, its flavor was bold, slightly bitter, yet strangely comforting. Most importantly, people felt awake, focused, ready to continue reading, praying, studying, or traveling for hours. For the first time, coffee had become a drink. No one knows the exact individual responsible for this discovery. History rarely records the names of ordinary people who quietly transform civilization. Instead, we only see the effects. Slowly, village after village, town after town, the drink spread throughout Yemen. Unlike many expensive luxuries, coffee was surprisingly practical. It didn't require rare ingredients. It could be prepared almost anywhere. Its stimulating effect was noticeable without making people lose control of their thoughts. This made it especially popular among scholars. Books became easier to study late into the night. Teachers remained energetic during long discussions. Merchants appreciated coffee during exhausting journeys. Writers discovered they could continue working long after sunset. Soon, coffeehouses began appearing. They were simple by modern standards. There were no polished counters, no espresso machines, no takeaway cups, just modest buildings where people gathered around warm pots of freshly brewed coffee. These places quickly became much more than somewhere to drink. They became places to exchange ideas. Travelers shared stories from distant lands, poets recited new verses, merchants negotiated business deals, religious scholars debated philosophy, neighbors discussed everyday life. In many ways, these early coffee houses became the social centers of their communities. People even gave coffee a special Arabic name, kahwa. Originally, the word had referred to a type of wine. Over time, it became associated with coffee instead. This change reflected something remarkable. Coffee offered many of the same social experiences as wine, conversation, companionship, and gathering together, but without causing intoxication. For many religious leaders, this made coffee especially appealing. Still, not everyone welcomed the new drink. Whenever something unfamiliar becomes popular, questions naturally follow. Was coffee beneficial? Was it dangerous?
They seemed happier than ever. Could it distract believers? Or did it actually help people become more devoted to study and prayer? These debates grew louder as coffee spread across Yemen. Some local authorities became suspicious. Crowded coffee houses brought together people from every part of society. Ideas flowed freely. News traveled quickly. Political discussions became common. For rulers, any place where large groups gathered regularly could appear threatening. Yet attempts to discourage coffee rarely lasted. People simply enjoyed it too much. Its popularity continued growing. Meanwhile, Yemeni farmers realized something important. The mountainous climate proved ideal for cultivating coffee plants. Cool nights, warm days, high elevations, seasonal rainfall, everything combined to produce exceptional beans. Villages carved narrow terraces into steep hillsides. Each carefully tended coffee tree represented months of patient work. Unlike fast-growing crops, coffee demanded time. Flowers appeared only briefly. Green cherries slowly ripened into deep crimson fruit. Harvesting required careful hands. Only the ripest cherries could be picked. Even after harvest, much work remained. The fruit needed drying. The beans required cleaning. Every stage influenced the final flavor. Generations of farmers gradually perfected these techniques through experience rather than written instruction. Coffee became more than a crop. It became part of daily life. Families worked together during harvest seasons. Children learned cultivation from parents and grandparents. Entire villages depended upon successful harvests. As demand increased, Yemeni merchants recognized coffee's enormous commercial value. They wanted to protect their profitable trade. Legend says many exported beans were deliberately heated or partially roasted before shipment. Doing so prevented the seeds from growing elsewhere. Whether this practice occurred exactly as described remains debated among historians, but one thing is certain. For many decades, Yemen successfully dominated the world's coffee trade. Ships departed regularly from an important port city called Mocha. Today, many people associate the word mocha with chocolate-flavored coffee drinks. Originally, however, Mocha referred to a real place, a bustling harbor where coffee from Yemen began its journey across the known world. Merchants from Egypt, Persia, India, the Ottoman Empire, and even Europe all visited Mocha seeking this increasingly valuable commodity. Sacks of carefully prepared beans filled warehouses near the docks. The rich aroma drifted through narrow streets. Every departing ship carried not merely cargo, but the beginning of a global transformation. Coffee was no longer a local curiosity. It had become an international product. Yet its greatest expansion still lay ahead. Far to the north, an empire stretching across 3 continents was about to embrace coffee with extraordinary enthusiasm. There, magnificent cities, crowded bazaars, and royal palaces would elevate coffee into an art form unlike anything the world had ever seen. And that remarkable story begins in the heart of the Ottoman Empire.
Generations came and went. As ships departed from the busy port of Mocha, their cargo was far more valuable than most people realized. Inside heavy burlap sacks rested thousands of carefully dried coffee beans, harvested from the mountains of Yemen and carried across the Red Sea toward one of history's most powerful empires, the Ottoman Empire. By the early 16th century, the Ottomans ruled an enormous territory stretching across 3 continents. Their cities connected Europe, Asia, and Africa through an intricate network of roads, ports, and markets. Merchants traveled constantly. Ideas spread quickly. New foods, fabrics, spices, and inventions moved through the empire faster than almost anywhere else in the world. Coffee arrived at exactly the right time. At first, it was simply another imported luxury, but it did not remain ordinary for long.
In cities like Cairo, Damascus, and especially Constantinople, people immediately noticed something unique about the dark new beverage. Unlike wine, coffee sharpened the senses. Unlike water, it carried a rich aroma that lingered long after the cup was empty. Unlike tea, which would become widespread much later in the Ottoman world, coffee possessed an unmistakable depth that fascinated first-time drinkers. Soon, demand began to grow. The capital city of Constantinople, known today as Istanbul, became the center of this growing fascination. The city's streets were already alive from sunrise until long after sunset. Merchants called from crowded marketplaces, craftsmen hammered copper and silver, bakers filled narrow alleys with the smell of fresh bread, sailors unloaded cargo from distant lands. Now, another fragrance joined the city's familiar scents.
The unmistakable aroma of freshly roasted coffee. People gathered simply to watch skilled roasters at work. Large iron pans rested above glowing charcoal fires. The pale green beans slowly darkened. As they roasted, gentle cracking sounds echoed through the room. The color changed from green to golden brown, then deeper brown, until finally they released an extraordinary fragrance, unlike anything people had experienced before. Roasting coffee soon became an art. Experienced roasters judged every batch by sight, smell, and sound, rather than clocks or thermometers. Even a slight mistake could ruin an entire harvest. After roasting came grinding. Long before electric grinders existed, workers used heavy brass or bronze hand mills. The beans were crushed into an exceptionally fine powder, finer than sand. The powder was then placed into small, long-handled copper pots called sesves. Water was added, sometimes sugar, occasionally spices like cardamom. The mixture was gently heated over glowing coals. As tiny bubbles formed across the surface, skilled brewers watched carefully. Coffee should never boil violently. Instead, it slowly rose toward the rim. Just before overflowing, the pot was lifted away from the heat. Sometimes this process was repeated 2 or 3 times to create an even richer flavor. Finally, the coffee was poured into small porcelain cups without handles. No milk, no cream. Simply rich black coffee topped with a delicate layer of foam. Drinking coffee became more than satisfying thirst. It became a ritual. Guests were welcomed with coffee before important conversations. Business meetings began with coffee. Family celebrations included coffee. Even marriage traditions sometimes involved coffee. According to Ottoman custom, a prospective bride often prepared coffee for visiting families. Her skill in serving coffee quietly demonstrated patience, hospitality, and grace. These traditions survived for centuries. Some continue even today. But perhaps the greatest Ottoman contribution to coffee culture was something entirely new: the coffee house. Around the middle of the 16th century, 2 merchants are said to have opened one of Constantinople's earliest famous coffee houses. Few could have predicted what would happen next. The idea spread with astonishing speed. Within only a few decades, coffee houses appeared throughout the city, then throughout the empire. These establishments quickly became some of the busiest places in urban life. People from every profession gathered together: merchants, scholars, artists, sailors, judges, craftsmen, government officials, even travelers from distant kingdoms. Inside, conversations lasted for hours. Some people discussed poetry, others debated philosophy. Chess games stretched deep into the evening. Storytellers entertained audiences with adventures from ancient Persia, Arabia, and beyond. Musicians played gentle melodies. News traveled from city to city long before newspapers became common. In many ways, coffee houses became the unofficial information centers of the Ottoman world. If something important happened, people often heard about it first while drinking coffee. European travelers visiting Constantinople were amazed. Many had never seen anything quite like these lively gathering places. Some described rooms filled with smoke from oil lamps.
Others wrote about beautifully decorated carpets covering the floors. Copper coffee pots reflected the warm glow of candlelight. The quiet sound of conversation blended with the soft clink of porcelain cups. To outsiders, the atmosphere felt both peaceful and intellectually alive.
The merchants who returned from the Ottoman Empire carried more than silk, spices, and precious goods. They also carried stories. Stories about a mysterious black drink served in elegant cups. A drink that filled busy coffee houses with scholars, poets, merchants, and travelers. Some described its rich aroma. Others spoke about its remarkable ability to keep people awake during long conversations. Many Europeans found these stories difficult to believe. How could a simple roasted bean inspire so much excitement? Curiosity slowly turned into demand. By the early 17th century, coffee began arriving at European ports aboard merchant ships. The Republic of Venice was among the first places where Europeans encountered coffee regularly. Venice was one of the busiest trading cities in the world. Its canals welcomed ships from the Ottoman Empire almost every day. Among their valuable cargo were sacks of coffee beans. At first, coffee remained an expensive luxury. Only wealthy merchants, nobles, physicians, and curious travelers could afford to taste it. Many had never experienced anything quite like it. The drink looked almost black. Its aroma was intense. Its bitterness surprised first-time drinkers. Some loved it immediately. Others needed several cups before appreciating its unusual flavor. Yet almost everyone agreed on one thing. Coffee was unforgettable. Its popularity grew slowly but steadily. Not everyone welcomed the new beverage. Because coffee had arrived from Muslim lands, some Europeans viewed it with suspicion. Religious leaders questioned whether Christians should consume a drink so closely associated with the Islamic world. Rumors spread quickly. Some claimed coffee was dangerous. Others insisted it encouraged strange behavior. A few critics even called it the devil's drink. The nickname spread through churches, marketplaces, and noble courts. People debated the issue passionately. Should coffee be accepted? Or should it be banned before it became more popular? Eventually, the question reached one of the most influential figures in Europe, Pope Clement VIII. According to a famous story, advisors urged the Pope to forbid coffee. Before making a decision, however, he chose to taste it himself. After drinking the unfamiliar beverage, he reportedly enjoyed it so much that he joked it would be a shame to leave such a delicious drink only to non-Christians. Whether every detail of this story is completely accurate remains uncertain, but historians agree that coffee was never officially banned by the Catholic Church. Instead, its popularity accelerated. Once religious objections faded, merchants sensed an enormous opportunity. Coffee imports increased dramatically. New coffeehouses appeared throughout Venice. Then they appeared in other cities: London, Paris, Amsterdam, Vienna. Each city embraced coffee in its own unique way. Among them, London became one of the most fascinating examples. The first coffeehouse opened there in the 1650s. At first, it seemed like a novelty, but within only a few decades, hundreds of coffeehouses operated across the city. People from nearly every profession visited them daily: lawyers, doctors, artists, scientists, businessmen, politicians, students. Unlike taverns, coffeehouses encouraged clear thinking rather than intoxication. Conversations often lasted for hours. Newspapers rested on wooden tables. Letters arrived from distant ports. Ideas spread rapidly. Visitors exchanged opinions about politics, science, philosophy, literature, and business. Soon, London's coffeehouses earned an unusual nickname: penny universities. The reason was simple. For the price of 1 penny, anyone could buy a cup of coffee and spend hours listening to intelligent discussions. A poor student could sit beside a wealthy merchant. A young writer might debate ideas with an experienced scientist. Knowledge became surprisingly accessible. Many important discoveries and business ventures began inside these lively rooms. Some coffeehouses specialized in particular subjects. One attracted ship captains and merchants involved in overseas trade. Another became popular with writers and publishers. Others welcomed scientists and inventors. Visitors soon knew exactly which coffeehouse matched their interests. Remarkably, one famous coffeehouse eventually developed into something far greater. Merchants gathered there to discuss maritime insurance. Ships crossing dangerous oceans faced storms, pirates, and accidents. Owners needed protection against financial loss. Inside this coffeehouse, agreements were negotiated. Over time, those meetings evolved into one of the world's most famous insurance markets. Today, it is known as Lloyd's of London. Another gathering place attracted stock traders. Businessmen met daily to exchange information about investments and international trade. These informal meetings gradually evolved into the foundations of the London Stock Exchange, all because people gathered over cups of coffee. Meanwhile, coffee transformed everyday routines. Before coffee became common, many Europeans often drank weak beer or diluted wine during the day because clean drinking water was not always reliable. Coffee introduced something entirely different, a hot beverage prepared by boiling water. The boiling process itself made the water safer to drink. At the same time, caffeine helped people remain alert. Workers stayed productive, students studied longer, merchants conducted business more efficiently. Coffee quietly reshaped daily life. Its influence reached artists as well. Painters gathered in coffee houses seeking patrons. Writers drafted poems while sipping fresh coffee.
Philosophers debated questions that still influence modern thought. Scientists exchanged experimental ideas that would later contribute to the scientific revolution. Coffee became more than a drink. It became fuel for conversation, fuel for learning, fuel for innovation. As demand continued rising, European merchants encountered a serious problem. Nearly all coffee still came from Yemen. That meant supply remained limited, prices stayed high. Whoever controlled Yemeni exports controlled much of the world's coffee trade. European trading companies wanted independence. They searched for ways to grow coffee elsewhere. If coffee could be cultivated in distant colonies, profits might become enormous. Governments invested heavily in finding living coffee plants. Botanists searched for fertile climates. Explorers transported fragile seedlings across oceans. Some attempts failed completely. Saltwater damaged young plants. Storms destroyed valuable cargo. Disease killed entire shipments before reaching their destinations. But eventually, one successful journey changed everything. A handful of living coffee plants survived. Those small plants would become the ancestors of millions of coffee trees growing throughout Asia, the Caribbean, and South America. Coffee was about to leave its Arabian homeland forever. Its next chapter would reshape agriculture, global trade, and the economies of entire continents. And that remarkable journey is where our story continues next.
By the late 17th century, coffee had become one of the most desired commodities in Europe. Demand grew faster every year. Merchants wanted more beans. Coffee houses needed constant supplies. Ships crossed the Mediterranean carrying every sack they could obtain. Yet one enormous obstacle remained. Almost all of the world's coffee still came from Yemen. The Arabian Peninsula controlled the trade. For European powers building global empires, depending on a single supplier was a risky strategy. They wanted something much greater. They wanted to grow coffee themselves. But achieving that goal would prove far more difficult than anyone expected. The Yemeni merchants understood the value of what they possessed. Coffee was no longer simply a drink. It had become the foundation of a thriving international business. Protecting that business meant protecting the coffee plant itself. For years, very few living coffee plants left Arabia. Most exported beans could no longer grow. Whether intentionally treated or simply processed before shipment, the result was the same. European traders could roast them, grind them, drink them, but they could not plant them.
Many governments became determined to change this situation. Botanists, explorers, and merchants searched for any opportunity to obtain healthy coffee seedlings. Among the most determined were the Dutch. The Dutch Republic had become one of the world's greatest trading powers. Its merchant ships sailed across Africa, Asia, and the East Indies. If anyone possessed the resources to establish new coffee plantations, it was the Dutch. After years of effort, they finally succeeded. Living coffee plants reached the Dutch colonies on the island of Java in present-day Indonesia. The climate proved remarkably suitable.
Warm temperatures, rich volcanic soil, seasonal rainfall. The young trees flourished. For the first time in history, coffee was being successfully cultivated far beyond its original homeland. This achievement transformed the global coffee trade. Europe no longer depended entirely upon Yemen. Harvests from Java began reaching European markets. The name of the island became so closely associated with coffee that even today many people still use the word Java as another name for a cup of coffee. The Dutch had unlocked the first great expansion. Other European empires quickly noticed. France wanted coffee, Portugal wanted coffee, Spain wanted coffee, Britain wanted coffee. Each nation searched for ways to establish plantations across its overseas colonies. The race had begun. One of the most famous stories from this period centers on a single coffee plant. In the early 18th century, a young coffee tree was carefully transported to Paris. It was placed inside the Royal Botanical Garden, where it received constant attention. Gardeners protected it from cold weather. They watched its growth carefully. To most visitors, it looked like an ordinary small tree. Yet its descendants would eventually spread across much of the Americas. According to a well-known account, a French naval officer named Gabriel de Clue received permission to transport one of these precious seedlings to the Caribbean island of Martinique. The journey across the Atlantic was extraordinarily difficult. Storms battered the ship, strong winds delayed progress, fresh drinking water became dangerously scarce. Legend says de Clue even shared his personal water ration with the fragile coffee plant to keep it alive. Whether every detail is perfectly accurate or not, historians agree on one remarkable fact.
Visitors soon knew exactly which coffeehouse matched their interests. Remarkably, one famous coffeehouse eventually developed into something far greater. Merchants gathered there to discuss maritime insurance. Ships crossing dangerous oceans faced storms, pirates, and accidents. Owners needed protection against financial loss. Inside this coffeehouse, agreements were negotiated. Over time, those meetings evolved into one of the world's most famous insurance markets. Today, it is known as Lloyd's of London. Another gathering place attracted stock traders. Businessmen met daily to exchange information about investments and international trade. These informal meetings gradually evolved into the foundations of the London Stock Exchange, all because people gathered over cups of coffee. Meanwhile, coffee transformed everyday routines. Before coffee became common, many Europeans often drank weak beer or diluted wine during the day because clean drinking water was not always reliable. Coffee introduced something entirely different, a hot beverage prepared by boiling water. The boiling process itself made the water safer to drink. At the same time, caffeine helped people remain alert. Workers stayed productive, students studied longer, merchants conducted business more efficiently. Coffee quietly reshaped daily life. Its influence reached artists as well. Painters gathered in coffee houses seeking patrons. Writers drafted poems while sipping fresh coffee. Across many colonial territories, enslaved men, women, and children were forced to perform this exhausting labor. They worked long hours beneath intense tropical heat. Many endured harsh conditions with little freedom and few rights. Coffee, which had become a symbol of comfort in European homes, was often produced through immense human suffering, far from the people who enjoyed drinking it. It is an uncomfortable truth, but an essential part of coffee's history. As the centuries passed, slavery was gradually abolished across much of the world. Yet plantation labor remained difficult. Many workers continued earning very little, despite producing one of the world's most valuable crops. Even today, conversations about fair wages, ethical farming, and sustainable coffee production remain deeply connected to this long history. Meanwhile, improvements in transportation changed everything once again. Steamships crossed oceans faster than sailing vessels. Railways carried coffee inland. New ports handled greater quantities than ever before. Fresh beans reached Europe and North America in record numbers. Coffee became cheaper. Ordinary families who could never have afforded it a century earlier now enjoyed it regularly. What had once been a luxury for kings, scholars, and wealthy merchants slowly became an everyday drink. Morning routines began changing around the world. Factories opened early. Office workers arrived carrying cups of coffee. Students studied late into the night.
Doctors worked long shifts. Writers filled page after page beside steaming mugs. The drink that had once grown quietly in the forests of Ethiopia had become woven into daily life across nearly every continent. Yet coffee's journey was still far from complete. The Industrial Revolution would transform not only how people worked, but also how coffee was roasted, packaged, transported, and enjoyed. Machines, factories, and new inventions were about to carry coffee into the modern age, and that is where our story continues next.
By the beginning of the 20th century, coffee had already conquered much of the world. It was served in royal palaces and modest homes. It accompanied philosophers during long debates and workers through exhausting shifts. It had crossed oceans, fueled industries, and connected cultures separated by thousands of miles. Yet one challenge remained. Making coffee still required time. The beans needed grinding, water had to be heated, the coffee had to brew carefully. For many people living increasingly busy lives, even a few extra minutes mattered. Inventors and manufacturers began asking a simple question. Could coffee become even more convenient? The answer would change the drinking habits of millions. One of the earliest breakthroughs came in the form of instant coffee. The basic idea was surprisingly simple. Instead of preparing fresh coffee every time, why not brew it first, remove the water, and preserve only the concentrated coffee solids? Later, anyone could simply add hot water and enjoy a cup within seconds. The concept had existed in various experimental forms during the 19th century, but it was the 20th century that turned instant coffee into a global success. During times of war, convenience became especially important. Soldiers often worked in difficult conditions where carrying heavy brewing equipment was impossible. Instant coffee provided warmth, comfort, and a familiar taste with very little preparation. Military demand encouraged further improvements. After the wars ended, many veterans returned home already accustomed to drinking instant coffee. Its popularity continued to grow. At the same time, another remarkable invention appeared: the espresso machine. Although earlier versions had existed for years, engineers gradually refined the technology. Instead of allowing hot water to pass slowly through coffee grounds, espresso machines forced hot water through finely ground coffee under high pressure. The result was completely different. A small cup, rich flavor, intense aroma, a smooth golden layer of crema resting gently on top. Espresso quickly became especially popular in Italy. Italian cafés developed a unique rhythm. Customers often entered, greeted the barista, drank a freshly prepared espresso while standing at the counter, exchanged a few friendly words, and continued with their day. The entire experience sometimes lasted only a few minutes, yet those few minutes became an important daily ritual. Soon, espresso inspired countless new drinks. Some people preferred adding steamed milk. Others enjoyed a layer of soft milk foam. The cappuccino became famous. Then came the latte, the macchiato, the flat white. Each reflected local traditions and personal preferences. Despite their differences, every one of them began with the same humble coffee bean, first discovered centuries earlier in Ethiopia. Coffee preparation itself also continued evolving. Homes welcomed electric coffee makers. Instead of tending a fire or carefully watching a copper pot, families simply measured coffee, added water, pressed a button, and waited. Morning routines became easier than ever. Technology quietly removed much of the effort while preserving the familiar comfort people loved. Meanwhile, scientists worked to understand coffee itself. For centuries, people had simply noticed that coffee increased alertness. Now researchers identified the primary reason: caffeine. This naturally occurring compound gently blocks signals in the brain that normally make us feel tired. As a result, many people feel more awake, focused, and energetic after drinking coffee. Scientists also discovered that coffee contains hundreds of natural compounds responsible for its remarkable aroma and flavor. Some beans carried notes of chocolate. Others reminded people of berries, citrus fruits, nuts, caramel, or flowers. Coffee turned out to be far more complex than anyone had imagined. Growing conditions influenced every cup.
The altitude where the tree grew, the amount of rainfall, the richness of the soil, the variety of the plant, the method used to process the cherries after harvest. Even the roasting technique changed the final taste dramatically. People gradually realized that coffee was not just one flavor. It was an entire world of flavors. This discovery encouraged a new appreciation for quality. Coffee experts began visiting farms.
They tasted beans from different countries. They carefully compared harvests. Farmers experimented with improved cultivation techniques. Consumers became increasingly interested in where their coffee came from. The names of producing countries became familiar. Brazil remained the world's largest producer. Colombia earned admiration for its smooth and balanced beans. Ethiopia continued producing remarkable coffees with delicate floral aromas, reminding the world of coffee's ancient birthplace. Vietnam emerged as a major producer of Robusta coffee, helping meet the enormous global demand. Across Central America, countries like Guatemala, Costa Rica, and Honduras developed strong reputations for exceptional quality. Each region offered something unique. Coffee had become a story of geography as much as history. Toward the end of the 20th century, another major transformation began. International cafe chains expanded rapidly. Modern coffee shops appeared in airports, shopping centers, university campuses, business districts, and neighborhoods across the globe. For many people, these cafes became more than places to buy a drink. Students studied there for hours, freelancers worked on laptops, friends celebrated birthdays, couples met for conversations. Business meetings took place over cappuccinos and lattes. The modern coffee shop became something surprisingly similar to the coffee houses of the Ottoman Empire hundreds of years earlier. People still gathered, they still exchanged ideas, they still formed friendships. Only the furniture, technology, and menu had changed. Coffee also found its way into popular culture. Films frequently showed characters meeting over coffee. Books described conversations beginning with the familiar phrase, "Would you like a cup of coffee?" Television programs featured cafes as everyday settings. Coffee had become part of the language of daily life. Around the world, entirely different traditions continued side by side. In Turkey, coffee remained deeply connected to centuries-old customs. In Italy, espresso reflected speed and simplicity. In Scandinavia, coffee breaks became cherished daily traditions. In Ethiopia, the traditional coffee ceremony continued to honor guests through a slow, beautiful process of roasting, grinding, and brewing fresh beans. Every culture embraced coffee differently, yet all shared the same remarkable connection to a plant first discovered long ago among the forests of East Africa. Today, billions of cups are enjoyed every single day. From busy city streets to quiet mountain villages, from luxury hotels to family kitchens, coffee continues to accompany ordinary moments and extraordinary conversations alike. But behind every cup lies a journey spanning more than 1,000 years, a journey of exploration, trade, innovation, culture, and countless human stories. In our final chapter, we'll reflect on why coffee remains one of humanity's most extraordinary creations, and why this simple bean continues to shape our world in ways both large and small.
As our journey slowly comes to an end, it is worth pausing for a simple question. How did one small berry, growing quietly in the forests of Ethiopia, become one of the most influential crops in human history? It did not happen overnight. There was no single invention, no single king, no single explorer. Instead, coffee changed the world little by little, generation after generation, one cup at a time. Its story began among wild trees growing beneath the African sun. Long before anyone roasted a bean, coffee was simply another plant in an ancient forest. Birds carried its seeds. Animals fed upon its bright red cherries. The seasons came and went, completely unaware that this modest shrub would one day connect billions of people across nearly every nation on Earth. From Ethiopia, coffee crossed the Red Sea into Yemen. There, patient farmers learned how to cultivate it on steep mountain terraces. Religious scholars transformed it from a fruit into a warm drink that helped them remain awake during long nights of prayer and study. Without those early experiments, the coffee we know today might never have existed. Then came the Ottoman Empire. Coffeehouses appeared in magnificent cities filled with merchants, artists, poets, and travelers. People gathered not simply to drink coffee, but to exchange ideas. Some historians have even described coffeehouses as the first great public meeting places where ordinary people could discuss literature, science, politics, and philosophy together. Long before the internet, long before newspapers reached every household, coffeehouses helped ideas travel from one mind to another. Europe embraced coffee next. Although some initially feared the unfamiliar drink, curiosity eventually overcame suspicion. Coffeehouses spread from Venice to London, Paris, Vienna, and countless other cities. Writers found inspiration there. Scientists debated discoveries. Businessmen founded companies. New friendships formed over steaming cups placed upon wooden tables.
Many institutions that still exist today can trace part of their origins back to conversations held inside those early coffeehouses. Then, coffee crossed oceans. Colonial empires carried fragile plants to distant lands. Plantations spread through Asia, the Caribbean, and South America. Millions of people devoted their lives to cultivating, harvesting, transporting, roasting, and preparing coffee. This expansion created enormous wealth, but it also brought hardship. Many plantations relied upon enslaved labor or poorly paid workers. The history of coffee is therefore both inspiring and complicated. It reminds us that even the world's most comforting traditions can carry difficult chapters that deserve to be remembered honestly. The Industrial Revolution transformed coffee again. Factories demanded alert workers. Railways delivered beans farther than ever before. Machines roasted enormous quantities with remarkable consistency. Coffee gradually became affordable for ordinary families. The 20th century introduced still more changes. Instant coffee offered speed and convenience. Espresso machines introduced bold new flavors. Electric coffee makers simplified morning routines. International cafés appeared in cities around the globe. Yet despite every technological improvement, one thing never truly changed. People continued gathering together over coffee. That simple act remains surprisingly constant across centuries. Today, coffee is grown in more than 70 countries. Every year, hundreds of billions of cups are enjoyed worldwide. Some people begin each morning with a familiar mug before sunrise. Others meet old friends in quiet cafes. Students prepare for important examinations with coffee beside their books. Doctors drink coffee during overnight hospital shifts. Writers sit before blank pages waiting for inspiration. Artists sketch ideas while sipping espresso. Travelers discover local cafes in unfamiliar cities. Families gather round kitchen tables, sharing stories over freshly brewed coffee. Every cup represents a small moment of human connection. And perhaps that explains coffee's remarkable success. It was never only about caffeine. It was never only about flavor. Coffee became meaningful because it accompanied conversations, celebrations, friendships, business agreements, quiet moments of reflection, even peaceful mornings spent alone. Across different cultures, coffee developed unique traditions. In Ethiopia, guests are still welcomed with beautiful coffee ceremonies where beans are roasted, ground, and brewed before everyone's eyes. The process is slow, respectful, almost meditative. In Turkey, thick, rich coffee continues to symbolize hospitality and tradition, just as it has for centuries. In Italy, espresso remains wonderfully simple, quick, strong, elegant. A brief pause before continuing with the day's work. In Scandinavia, coffee breaks have become an important part of daily life, encouraging people to slow down, share conversation, and enjoy one another's company. In Latin America, coffee reflects generations of farming families whose knowledge has been passed from parents to children for hundreds of years. Every culture adds its own chapter to coffee's remarkable story. Even science continues discovering new details. Researchers study how climate affects coffee production. Farmers experiment with sustainable growing methods that protect forests while producing exceptional beans. Breeders develop more resilient coffee varieties capable of surviving changing weather patterns. Around the world, millions of people work together to ensure future generations can continue enjoying coffee. Its story is still being written. Perhaps that is the most fascinating part of all. Coffee is not merely history, it is living history. Every harvest creates another chapter. Every cup continues a tradition stretching back more than 1,000 years. As you think about your own experiences, you may remember the aroma of freshly ground beans drifting through your home. Perhaps you recall sharing coffee with a friend after many years apart. Maybe you've enjoyed a quiet sunrise with nothing more than birdsong and a warm cup resting gently in your hands. Those moments may seem ordinary, yet they connect you to countless generations of people who found comfort in exactly the same simple ritual. A shepherd in Ethiopia, a scholar in Yemen, a merchant in Constantinople, a philosopher in Paris, a farmer in Colombia, a barista in Tokyo, a traveler in New York. Though separated by centuries and continents, each became part of the same remarkable story. And perhaps that is coffee's greatest achievement. Not that it became the world's favorite drink, but that it quietly brought people together, again and again, across languages, across religions, across cultures, across history itself. So the next time you lift a warm cup of coffee, take a quiet moment to remember its extraordinary journey. From a handful of wild berries growing deep within Ethiopian forests, to one of humanity's most beloved daily traditions. Thank you for joining me on this peaceful journey through the history of coffee. Until our next story, sleep well, sweet dreams, and good night. End of documentary.